After making sure none of the pregnant mares were in labor, Sage scratched a few noses on her way out of the barn. Shutting the big red door, she glanced over at the little 2-room cabin, which sat a few yards away. The lights were still on inside, and she pivoted in that direction, telling herself she was just going to check and see if Adam needed anything. At dinner earlier, he'd said the cabin appeared to have everything, but she wanted to make sure. As she approached, she noticed the curtains were open in the front living room. The bedroom and bath were at the rear of the structure. Not wanting to disturb him if he'd fallen asleep with the lights on, Evan had said the younger man had worked his ass off during the day. She peeked through the window. Well, he definitely wasn't asleep. Dressed in a pair of black sweatpants and nothing more, Adam was kneeling in profile on the floor with his hands resting on his muscular thighs and his head tilted down. His eyes were shut, and she guessed he was meditating. Staying in the shadows, she studied his features. Dark blonde hair in need of a slight trim, a chiseled jaw covered in coarse stubble, corded neck muscles, broad shoulders and chest, followed by a narrow waist and rock-hard abs. A deep V of muscles dusted with fine hair down the middle disappeared into his sweatpants. "Holy crap! Is it getting hot out here?" She may be a widow who was still mourning the only man she'd ever loved, but she would have to be 6 feet under, along with Mark, to not appreciate the perfect male form in front of her. A stirring developed, deep in her womb, and she felt her panties grow damp. For the first time since Mark's death, Sage felt a longing and desire. Her nipples tightened as her mouth watered. Shit! Why did it have to be this man who brought her libido out of its 30-month slumber? She'd felt something earlier after he'd caught her smiling at how he'd managed to get Jenna talking at dinner. There was something about the way his eyes seemed to dance, while his deep, rumbling laughter filled the air. And geez, his dimples were just too adorable. Stop it. Stop thinking about him as a man. He's your employee and nothing more. He probably wouldn't be here for long, and one-night stands weren't her thing. And there was no way she was having a meaningless fling 150 feet from where her children were sleeping soundly. But damn, she was lonely. It wasn't a new feeling, or one she'd been denying to herself, but it wasn't something she'd acted on. She missed being held, caressed, and loved. Maybe Ashley was right. Her friend had spent the past 6 months trying to convince Sage it was okay to start dating again. Maybe it was time to rejoin the living in every way. Adam's chin dipped, and it wasn't until he made the sign of the cross that she realized he'd been praying. He'd mentioned he wanted to attend church. She was a member of Reverend Stephen's congregation as well, but she wasn't used to seeing anyone pray like that outside of Sunday service or the dinner table. Suddenly embarrassed she'd been ogling him, she stepped further into the shadows as Adam stood and stretched. With one last admiring glance at the man, she spun on her heel and hurried back to her house, completely forgetting what she'd been doing outside of the cottage in the first place. Closing and locking the kitchen door behind her, Sage leaned against it with a sigh, and subconsciously fingered the gold wedding ring that still occupied her left hand. She had to be out of her mind. Adam was an employee, an ex-con employee, a drifting ex-con employee whom she'd had just met this morning. There, now that she had that straight in her mind, she could push away the thoughts of his amazing physique and how her own body had reacted at the sight. Damn,